You guys wanted to reduce processed and excess sugar. You did it. Good job. It didn't help obesity. Why? The reason is exactly what you said, more fat and more alcohol.
Welcome to the show where we help you make smart nutrition simple. If you want proven nutrition strategies to help you build a better body and create the energy to show up for your family without overly restrictive and unrealistic dieting, then you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and enjoy this episode.
What is going on, my friends? Welcome back to another episode of the Smart Nutrition Made Simple show. I'm your host, Ben Brown, head coach and owner here at Body Systems. We're an online nutrition and fitness coaching company, and we help you change the belief system around what it means to be healthy. And we do that through our nutrition, our strength, and our lifestyle coaching programs. And in today's podcast conversation, I'm chopping it up with my friend, Matt Hoodie. Matt is a dietitian, he's a nutrition coach, and he's a gym owner here in Scottsdale, Arizona. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a myriad of things, including how, despite a decrease in high fructose corn syrup consumption, obesity rates are still climbing, and why exactly that is. We talk about just how much calorie intake and nutritional awareness matter, including the carnivore diet. We talk about my perspective on why trying some of these aggressive dieting tactics might actually be a good thing as compared to the standard American diet. And I'll give you my rationale around why that is. We talk GLP-1 agonist weight loss drugs and the concerns for long-term weight loss and lifestyle behaviors. We talk about our top supplement recommendations, and most importantly, we talk about the big picture of nutrition, exercise, and weight loss, and why and how we as coaches need to set long-term expectations for our clients so that they can truly make lifelong change. And I have to tell you guys, I loved this conversation with Matt, certainly because of the content. But even more meaningful for me was because Matt was one of my first interns when I was running my personal training business close to 13 years ago. And now he's become a well-respected coach in the nutrition industry, whom I'm very proud to have supported and positively influenced in some small way. And I don't take any credit for his success, but I do take extreme satisfaction in knowing that I've played a small part and a small role in the thousands of lives that he's changed over all of these years. And that means a lot to me and my life's mission towards health and wellness. And so I hope you enjoy this conversation. I appreciate you tuning in and listening. And without further ado, here is my buddy Matt Hoodie.
I am here with Benjamin Brown. So Ben owns his own business. He does basically what I do, nutritional coaching, training. Ben is actually the individual who is responsible for getting me into this field. Thank you. I know I just spent some time thanking you, but about 15 years ago, I shadowed Ben for a week. You're at the air park, training in-person clients at the air park in 5 a.m. or whatever. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I, wasn't sure which pathway I wanted to take in life. And I reached out to a handful of coaches, and you were the one who happened to reply to me, thank God. And I just saw what an impact you could have on someone else's life. Like, it was amazing. It was like you were just a personal trainer, but you cared so much more. And I wanted to become that same version of you, and that's kind of why I started my business and why I do what I do now. So oddly enough, I ran into you at the gym just working out. You still look incredible. So I figured it would be great for us you're one of the most knowledgeable people I know in the field, so I figured it'd be good to chop it up. So that's what we're going to do today.
Likewise, dude, and I'm absolutely honored to have the conversation. It was great running into you. It's great just kind of circling back and seeing what you've been able to accomplish over all of the years. And I was really impressed with you, way back, and it's just been awesome to just see your journey. So I love, having the chance to just chop it up here.
I appreciate it. I think it's going to be good. I think people are going to get a lot out of it. I think it'll be more fun. I'm looking forward to it. So let's dive right into things, right? The first thing we were talking about that I would like to kind of start with is the obesity trend in America, right? In the direction we've been generally going with obesity. And you may have seen a post I made recently talking about how sugar consumption has actually been on a decline for over 2 decades now. For actually, what are we in now? 25. So 27 years now, since 1998, it's been on a decline. The shocking statistic there was the high fruit. That was the one that surprised me, was that we're eating 25 pounds less per person of high fructose corn syrup than we were 2 decades ago. Like 25 pounds less per person. And obesity has skyrocketed. So I'm like, that's a lot of calories that we cut out. What the hell did we replace them with to not only equate to that amount, but actually we exceeded it because we're getting fatter. So that was an interesting one to me. I was curious, was that surprising to you at all to see?
Yeah, I mean, it's what's remarkable to me is just the trajectory that we're on, and I think so much of it has to do with kind of food quality, obviously, and the fact that we're very aware of sugar. We're very aware of carbohydrates. And so, yet we're still talking about it incessantly. Right. And so there's this massive disconnect, Matt, right? With, like, again, people are very cognizant that they're eating food, that carbohydrates are calories, that carbohydrates are sugar. Right. So what are we missing along the way? And obviously we're missing the fact that we're consuming significantly more fat than we ever have ever before.
100%.
And then to say nothing, you mentioned alcohol. Too. Yeah. And so what is it that you're seeing and observing in your conversations with clients, I'm curious, around, and what have you observed over the years with respect to kind of this, this topic in terms of, right, like why things are continuing.
What's causing it? Right. Like what the hell we're doing? Like it's almost like it worked. Like you guys wanted to reduce processed and excess sugar. You did it. Good job. It didn't help obesity. Why? The reason is exactly what you said, more fat and more alcohol. What I'm seeing with clients, especially since COVID, I don't know about you, is an increase in just regular consumption of alcohol for no reason. Not that it's a celebration anymore. It's just a glass of wine at night. Yeah. For me, did that increase a lot with you for COVID too, or
personally, or with the clients? Because yes, it did for a minute.
But for real, I noticed it became much more socially acceptable and much more common for my clients to put down they drink 3 to 5 times a week instead of the normal 1 to 2 that I always used to get.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm a bit older than you, so I've worked with clients that are kind of in my demographic, along the years. Mm-hmm. And I would say that I've seen that alcohol consumption is perpetually a problem, right? With respect to weight loss. But I don't disagree that obviously in the initial stages of COVID over the first couple of years, like alcohol consumption went up considerably.
When everyone was locked indoors and all.
Right, so obviously that's really problematic. But then to boot, we were talking about the fat intake, and that's something that I'm really observing more and more. Like I have young kids, they're 15 to 9. And so we're kind of exposed to a lot more of, I guess, what the general population is doing, right? Because you and I eat certain ways. And so sometimes you're on a deserted island and you don't realize like the way people really
normal,
eat.
The rest of America
but with restaurants, with obviously processed foods, and I think the kids, like what we're feeding kids is a perfect example.
100. Well, I mean, I got, let's see going to be 13 and 16.
Right.
So I'm in the same boat as you. You go in my pantry, you're going to see stuff in there that I don't got a choice. It's going to be in there because they're 13 and 16.
And so from a food manufacturing standpoint, we're obviously making foods that need to taste good, that need to light up the brain, right? Hyperpalatability, ultra-processed foods, and that comes with a tremendous amount of salt, a tremendous amount of fat, and and then these food companies are also diligent with the carbohydrate, the sugar of wanting to market and frame things as such that it's
they do a great job.
Low carb.
How many packages say no high fructose corn syrup, but still have a massive amount of added sugar? Doesn't matter, there's no high fructose corn. And then when you look at that added sugar with the amount of fat they've snuck in now, because nobody is looking at fat, nobody pays attention. It's like my uncle, he does work for food manufacturers, and he's a food chemist, and they have started to tell him like, we need palatability, low sugar. Like people don't care about fats. You can have 20 grams of fat in something. Nobody bats an eye, but you have double digit sugar and people panic. That is where the attention is. That's what I'm seeing personally and what's interesting is it's two areas I'm seeing an increase in fat. It's the unsaturated, the PUFAs and MUFAs, right, that are being added to a lot of the foods that are probably in my pantry right now. But then it seems like there's a movement also glorifying the consumption of saturated fats. So it's unsaturated and you're getting the unsaturated from the food companies, and then you're getting this massive thumbs up, okay, to eat copious amounts of saturated from the health people. So I think between those two things, it's just skyrocketing.
And where are people supposed to turn? When we're given the green light that fats are healthy, right? And so I can start to include more fatty meats or more heavy creams or butter, or it's like good for me, right? And that's not true to a degree, but it's still calories. It's still saturated. It's still calories.
Fat, it's still relative to you. And it's not that you just unlimited amounts, right? It's like what happened with keto when keto came out, right? It doesn't mean you just eat copious amounts of bacon. Maybe you do need more saturated fat for your sex hormones, but you don't need to be eating 12 strips of bacon a day.
But there's very few people
few people who are
legitimately under eating saturated fats.
I agree with you.
I actually think this is really relevant, and I'm curious for you, kind of how you've been able to infuse this conversation into your clientele and how you help your clientele, because I think this is valid for the listener from just an application standpoint, right? Like, how do you help people determine what's appropriate from a fat intake standpoint? And one of the things that we've had conversations about that I think is really relevant is just eating out. And that's when we know it's like, maybe you're choosing a salad, maybe you're choosing a piece of meat, maybe you're choosing, the veggies and stuff, but yet we know that the calories are still adding up far beyond what people realize, because there's a lot of hidden fats included. So like, what are some tools that you use to help your clients navigate that?
Absolutely, yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing I do is I have a whole guide that essentially talks about how food is made differently at a restaurant, and how you have to understand that if you are eating at a restaurant, you are eating significantly more calories for the same amount of food. I call it food tax, right? I'm like, they're gonna spread a tablespoon of butter on your bun and put it flat down on the grill. You're never gonna do that at home. Tablespoon, 200 calories. So I try to make them hyper aware of the calories that aren't visible. They're like, I call it food tax. They're invisible calories, and show them all these different places that is coming in the back of a house at a restaurant that doesn't have avocado oil spray, that doesn't have any of these things, right? And I start talking to them about, like, your mushrooms are gonna soak up this. You might think fajitas are healthy and they're great, but if those onions have soaked up who knows how much canola oil or whatever else they use to cook them in, they're not anymore, right? So we need to go with the street tacos. You're actually better off going with them. And what I've shown people is, the way I do it is in a kind of showing them the amount of extra volume and food they get. I go, look, I can give you 100 calories of rice, right? And I can give you another 100 calories of rice, and you have 200 calories of rice, twice the amount. Or I can take 100 calories of rice and I can throw it in a wok with 2/3 of a tablespoon of oil, fry it up, put it back in. You now have 200 calories of rice. On one side, you got double the amount of food. And I show them, you're giving up calories for nothing in return. You're gonna be hungry. This is not gonna work long term. So I kind of try to showcase that to them. And then within that, we end up discovering where their balance is for the right amount of fats and carbohydrates to kind of keep them full. But a lot of people don't know, because it's almost invisible. Like you said, it's invisible.
How would they?
How would they?
And I think it speaks to, it's like, what's remarkable to me is how many people think they know, though. And this is not a dig in any way, shape, or form, but it's like, we know from the calorie tracking science and from research studies that just there's this massive margin for error. Even with trained dietitians
who know what they're doing. You look at the research studies on dietitians who are supposed to be the best of the best, and they're way off. So then when you're having a conversation with a client, and I'm like, listen,
I appreciate the fact that you've been tracking everything.
Yeah.
But you've had, restaurant meals like 6 out of the past 7 days.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but I tracked it, right? But can we agree that
is
just because you tracked it doesn't mean it's accurate, right? There's probably a 50% margin for error, and it's probably on the high side.
And your body is reflective of what goes in your body, not what goes in your phone.
That's right. And so it's like, so when push comes to shove, when you're not seeing the results that you want to see, we have to look back at the data, because I don't care if you want to talk about your metabolism. I don't care if you want to talk about your thyroid. Like, I don't care what it is. At the end of the day, the reality is it's still an equation. It's still 100%. Calories in, calories out matter. Movement matters. And it's often not as complex as we make it out to be.
I agree. We were saying that before I got on here. I think it's been made out to be more complex lately than it really is. And people don't know what the hell to do anymore. I feel like it's so convoluted, nutrition as a whole. If we could go back and just simplify things again, 15 years ago, people would be better off, I think. People were better off.
It's like we have these foundational pillars of understanding, listen, we need to take awareness and create accountability and responsibility and ownership over our calorie intake. We know we need to move in certain ways enough and expend enough calories, right? We know we need to sleep and recover and manage our stress. And it's like, there's not a whole heck of a lot.
Do the basics, especially before you start worrying about these. I always tell people, I'm like, there are like 3 to 4 things that make up 90% of how you're going to look, feel, and live. Then there are 10 things that make up the other 10%. Yeah. Don't be caught missing one of those 3 or 4 things and hitting 7 out of 10 of the ones. I know guys who drink a post-workout protein shake after every workout, but they have no idea how many steps they get. They don't drink water.
That's right.
But they're religious about their post-workout shit. You know what I mean? It's like, there's so many things that people have to focus on. People don't know where to focus. And if it's being placed in the wrong places, you can be putting in a lot of work and not getting a lot of return for it.
Yeah. And it just seems like we're majoring in the minors in a lot of areas, right? It's like, well, what about my cold plunge, and what about my supplements, and what about my biohacking stuff, and what about the carnivore diet or intermittent fasting, or like my whatever, the red light, and
it's like
that's all good and well, right? But are we coming back to the fundamentals, and are we legitimately taking ownership over those?
Taking ownership of those fundamentals. Yeah.
And that's my whole thing. It's like, and you and I before, we were talking about carnivore, and I was like, I just don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Right? Because like at the end of the day, I think it could probably serve someone well who, like, let's be honest, right? If they're eating the standard American diet, and they're motivated to take action and be like, I want to try this carnivore thing.
Absolutely.
Well, who am I to poo-poo that? Because what does it mean ultimately? It's not about, is red meat bad for us, or am I really that worried about the saturated fats, again, compared to the standard American diet?
Compared to what they were doing previously.
That's right. So if it's going to give them the opportunity to remove that stuff, I'm like, you know what? Go for it. Let's see how it goes.
Right.
Because my experience is that ultimately someone's going to progressively work their way back to some semblance
off of it. And that's exactly what I was going to say. And Paul Saladino is a great example, right?
That's right.
I mean, he started off as Carnivore MD was his handle, literally. Right. He got rid of that. Little by little he went to a doctor. Electrolytes were all screwed up. Doc was like, well, yeah, dude, look what you're eating. So started adding in like electrolyte powders. Then started adding in fruit. Then started adding in small amount. It's like little by little. And that's my issue with it is it's not sustainable, and it's not healthy in a sustainable way. If it's the extreme thing to get you to turn like things around from what you're currently doing, and your current pantry is Fruit Loops, and it's all these, it's cake stirs and all these just terrible things, and you're door dashing 7 days a week, then and you're inspired to do it, then yeah, do it. But if even the guy who essentially created and popularized it has realized it is not healthy in and of itself, then that tells you something, and you should be looking long term at how am I not get off it, but how am I going to introduce these other things?
Yeah, and as long as we're being honest about that, because again, we're living on the spectrum, and it's like invariably you're going to have to learn how to like live in the gray.
Right.
It's like there's
going to be some gray areas.
There's going to be a lot of gray area relative to like we work with real people.
Right.
This is not social media land. We're not fucking influencers. You know, it's like living this kind of fake lifestyle.
Life.
I don't know anyone who really like lives the way that people display their lives.
I wake up at 6 a.m. and I prepare a course.
You know, you have kids,
Yeah.
I have kids. This is, again, real life. So it's like, dude, you, by all means, like you want to try carnivore and it's going to mean you're going to be removing a lot of that crap, then go for it. But let's acknowledge when things get challenging and it's like, dude, there's nothing wrong with eating some carbs, right? And we probably could make a very strong case for why it's actually going to benefit you and over the long term, how this is actually going to benefit your life so that you can find that semblance of normalcy so that you can interact in the day-to-day world, like actually the world that we're living in right now. And I think that's the biggest obstacle and kind of art and kind of challenge that we experience on a daily basis is just being able to work with clients one-on-one and help them find where on that spectrum it's appropriate to kind of to start and to progress so that they have the tools and the skills, right, to be successful long term.
Right. That's the hard. I mean, that's the hardest part. Especially, I feel like that has become more difficult. Have you felt like with the nutrition? And again, maybe because I'm more on social media, I feel like people are chasing more balls and they don't know what to.
I wouldn't say for me, it's not necessarily more difficult.
Okay.
I think for me, it's about being more convicted and assertive in telling the client like what we're focusing on.
Right.
And so as I've evolved as a coach of not giving in to some of the outside noise, right? Because I've been doing this long enough, you've been doing this long enough, you know what works. Right. And so with the type of clients that I work with, it's just challenging them enough in the right ways and onboarding them and setting expectations right from the very beginning of like, this is what the roadmap is going to look like. And there's plenty of leeway one way or the other. This is not a dictatorship where I'm like telling you what to do and you have to follow the plan. This is very much a democracy of like, we can discuss things, but there's still a roadmap. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And so,
and they have to respect you as the authority figure guiding them on that roadmap. Because there are going to be times when you don't know which to. There's two routes on the map, and they need to know which way to go. And that I think is where having set that at the beginning, like you said, as the authority figure, if you've done that properly, you can direct them and guide them, and they will follow along.
You know what I'm curious about actually, and that I wanted to talk with you about, is someone who's lost a significant amount of weight in your life. I'd be curious for you kind of what your perspective is on how things are now relative to like when you first were going through your weight loss journey. And I don't know, what do you think are the biggest challenges that people are encountering and experiencing right now?
So I think right now it's honestly harder than it was when I lost my weight. I lost my weight largely I lost it partially the wrong way, but one of the reasons I think weight loss is harder now is I think more of our calories are coming from fat. And I think the more calories you have coming from fat, and I did quite a bit of research on this, I don't know if you know this, America is 19th in obesity. There are 18 countries fatter than America. A lot of them have way less processed food, but they all cook with a lot of fat and oil in there. I mean, it's insane.
That's interesting. I think probably people would assume that America's among the
number
top.
one. I thought we were going to be like one or two. We're 19. And there are countries that are, Qatar is ahead of us. Egypt is ahead of. There are just
a lot of countries in the Middle East
that cook with a lot of oil,
fats and oils, and
but it's not adding volume to the meal. So I think the harder thing people are facing now, and I get this all the time, and you can tell me if you do too, Matt, I don't get it. I eat healthy. I don't overeat. So they're not eating a large amount of volume how it used to be with carbs, and they're not eating unhealthy foods. They're eating avocado. They're drizzling olive oil before they put their piece of salmon in, but they're a 130-pound female who wants to be 120, and that's just leading to too many calories.
I think that's definitely, until you've spent the time and energy like truly tracking
Right.
and
Right.
like objectively looking at how the foods are adding up, you just don't
You don't
realize.
know.
You just don't realize how
Yeah.
significant it is. And I think that's the biggest value for people, is to have the opportunity to do that.
It lays down that education. I will say the hardest thing I think in weight loss now is so many people, you don't need to eat a lot to overeat anymore.
Yeah.
You can go to Postino and get a charcuterie board and consume 2,000 calories before you know it. And in my head, I have a hard time with that because it's not a lot of food. And I think a lot of people go, well, that's not fair. Like I only,
It's not fair, that's right.
I had some prosciutto and some nuts and I had some red wine. I thought that was good for my heart, and nuts are a good fat. How am I at 1,200 calories? What are you talking about? And I think that's what's become really difficult for people is it used to be, I almost want to say easier because carbs were, and sugar was the problem.
Yeah.
So you just point at it and you get rid of it and you lose weight. And now we've kind of gotten sneaky in replacing things with a lot of fats, which aren't as visible. So you can work them into food and people don't know it. You would not, well, you would believe, because you do exactly what I do, how many of your clients are surprised the first week when because what I do, and here's how I do, I kind of have people track freely within caloric parameters, kind of like a budget the first week to see what are you overeating. And 99 out of 100 people are overeating fat. I very rarely have somebody overeating carbs anymore. Does it look similar for you?
Very similar.
Do you approach it similarly?
The exact same way. We have a discovery period.
Discovery.
And it's usually, it will go up to 4 weeks depending on the client, because they learn so much through that period. And it's just creating so much awareness, so much autonomy, and helping them realize like, well, one, I didn't realize how much I was consuming. Yeah. Okay, that becomes very obvious, just like a budget, right? Yeah. It's like there's a reason that we do that. 2 is that they have the power to make adjustments. And from a psychology standpoint, right, from a behavioral psychology standpoint, is like, we know that when someone is being watched, put differently, but it's like when someone knows that they have accountability, and they have a coach, as an example, who's looking at their intake, they're going to make better decisions
automatically.
Right? It's called the Hawthorne effect. And so it's our behaviors are different when someone is watching. It's like when we're driving down the road, we see a police car.
Even if we try not to, the study tells you don't change your behavior. We have learned inevitably you change your behavior.
And what's so empowering about that for people, and again, this is really to speak to the value of the calorie tracking process. For anyone that poo-poos it, right. And early in my career, I was not a fan of calorie tracking, but it was mostly because I didn't want to have to track.
Okay,
right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, okay. And so that's one of the things that I adopted over the past 10 years or so, that I had been pushing back against. And I think it mostly was just because I just didn't realize. And through continuing to study more and more nutrition, it was like, it's a no-brainer if we're serious about controlling for calories.
And for changing things for the rest of your life. It's like you said, I think you said, the education that you gain from those 2 weeks or 4 weeks, invaluable. That's what is really setting you up for keeping the weight off the rest of your life. I could give you a meal plan for those 4 weeks where you'd lose the same amount of weight and you would walk away with nothing. As soon as that meal plan's gone and you go on vacation, you have absolutely nothing to apply, and you're gonna gain the weight right back. That is the value of MyFitnessPal that I think is so often overlooked. I think people view it as this thing that's gonna give me an eating disorder and this thing that I'm gonna have to use for the rest of my life and it's gonna control me. No, it's gonna educate you about where the wrong things are coming in right now and where you might need a little bit more. And before you know it, once you start to fine tune those things, your body just, fixes itself.
Well, a thing that we have to take into consideration is this: it would be one thing if it's 100 years ago, and it's like all we're eating is whole food, right? And we're in the early stages of agriculture, and it's like, the vast majority of the foods we're eating are wholesome, nutrient dense, relatively low calorie foods. And by the way, we're a hell of a lot more physically active. The nutrient content of the food is significantly higher, right? So for all of those reasons, but we're just living in a vastly different world.
We have to accept it.
Now, and that's right. And so it doesn't matter if it's fair or not fair, or however you think I shouldn't have to track. Well, maybe you don't have to. And obviously you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but the landscape of food and food quality and food manufacturing and processing today is such that if you actually want to have control over your calorie intake, then it's worth at least being cognizant 100%. Of how things are adding up, so you can develop the tools and the skills. That's something that you don't have to do forever, but you always have something to come back to audit if and when things aren't going the way that you want.
Same word I use. And that's exactly how I believe MyFitnessPal should be used.
Right.
And that's how I encourage people to use it too.
Hey guys, I want to interrupt this conversation briefly with an exciting announcement. If you're a father and struggling to lose the pounds that have crept on over the years, I understand your challenge. You're juggling a successful career, a loving family, and now you're looking to regain that energy and physique that seems to have slipped away. And that's exactly why I created Prime Fit Operating System. Prime Fit OS is a unique hybrid coaching program designed specifically for men like you. Now, you guys know me, we're not about quick fixes or impossible routines. Instead, we focus on real sustainable change through personalized nutrition and science-driven strength training, all wrapped up in a supportive community with expert guidance directly from me and my 20 years of experience working with men just like you. Imagine mastering your nutrition without restrictive dieting, getting stronger and leaner, and boosting your overall energy, all without overwhelming your already busy schedule. With Prime Fit OS, you're getting more than just a cookie cutter nutrition and fitness plan. You're embarking on a transformative journey that fits into your life, not the other way around. So, if you're ready to take the first step towards a healthier, leaner, stronger, more energetic, confident, ass-kicking you, join us over at Prime Fit Operating System. Trust me, guys, your family, your career, and most importantly, you will thank you for it. So if you guys are interested in getting started and want to find out more about the program, let's chat. Just head over to primefitos.com/call and grab a time on my calendar. Remember, it's your time to be at your prime.
Switching topics a little bit to GLP-1 agonists. I'm sure you have clients on them. I have clients on them. There is semaglutide and tirzepatide, which has the GIP in it as well.
GLP, yeah.
I anecdotally, like we said, I'm a bit more of a fan of the tirzepatide. It does look in the research again. I know it's early, like it's a bit more effective. What are your thoughts? How many clients do you have taking it? How have you had success with people coming off it? All that good stuff.
That's the great question. Is people coming
and
off
we'll
of
get,
it.
We'll get to it.
And I think that's one to like really put a stamp on, to come back to, because that's the biggest unknown.
100%.
It's like, listen, we know the stuff works.
It works.
Right? It's been, and it's not new. It's been around.
Even
for
one that didn't work
time.
great was 33 pounds of weight loss. Come on.
So, it works, but it begs the question. It's like everything else that I've been kind of contextualizing, is like, it so depends on the person. And I've spoken with a number of clinicians about it, and it does seem to be that the tirzepatide is kind of the favorite, at least among more progressive clinicians that I tend to work with.
I work
with a lot of guys that are on hormone therapy, and have body composition goals. And so from like a symptom standpoint, it seems to be like the tirzepatide is kind of
lesser. It seems to have less symptoms, less of the consistent. I don't know about you, but here's what I see: less of the low grade nausea, less of people feeling like there's undigested food sitting. Is that what you're getting?
Yeah.
Sitting in their stomach. I hear the same thing from the guys and gals I have who are on tirzepatide. And to be honest with you, they are losing a little faster than my people who I have had on Ozempic or semaglutide.
Yeah.
Again, it's a small sample size. Neither of us are, you know what I mean? But just from what we're seeing.
Yeah. So, I really try and kind of meet the client where they are, and I want to look at it as something that could be supremely beneficial, not just from like a cultural standpoint, like a societal standpoint. It's like, listen, we have an obesity epidemic.
We do.
So there's potentially a lot of benefits from drugs and allopathic medicine. And in this particular case, it seems like there's, we know that it works to a degree, but it begs the question of like, we have to look at long-term, we have to look at lifestyle, we have to look at, is this a lifelong drug, and what are the implications, long-term for someone, and what are we doing with them while they're utilizing the drug to make sure that they're infusing the the behavioral tools and skills.
So
and
that when the drug is
behaviors, right?
gone, things are still going to continue or maintain where they're at. It's a really hard, and it's so hard to say because they're not facing the same challenges when they're on. They're not facing the same hunger. So it is
the food obsession.
The food obsession,
right?
the food noise. You hear it from people all the time. The food noise for most of my people, it comes back very quickly when they stop taking it. I don't know if you've heard the same thing from people. But for the most, I hear a few people say, you know what, it fixed me. And you know what, hope they're telling the truth. God willing, it stays like that for the rest of their life, and they keep it off. But most of my people say the food noise comes back strong and quickly when they get off these.
I think that it's pretty clear that that's the case. And I think a lot of clinicians are talking about, like, listen, this is potentially a lifelong drug. And that's concerning for me. It's concerning for how it functions. That's right.
Right? I mean, you think about what it is. I didn't mean to hijack the conversation. But you think about what it is, right? You worry about our pancreatic function long term. Is it going to go back? I mean, if I'm on it forever, I mean, let's say down the road, the delayed gastric emptying, let's say 20 years from now, we find out an increase in colon cancer for people on GLP-1s because we've been keeping the stuff inside us longer. Now what do? You've been on it, and let's say it somehow did something to your pancreatic function. Now you want to come off it, and your pancreas, you were only 20 pounds overweight to begin with a perfectly fine functioning pancreas. So there's so many unknowns. That's how I feel about it.
I agree completely. And the reality is, like, listen, neither of us are doctors. No. And so, but we do help people implement the fundamental behaviors. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I can't justify someone being on those drugs if they're not taking concerted action to do all of the things that we're already preaching anyways.
Yes.
And so that's my biggest thing.
Those should be done first.
Yeah, you want to go on the drug, great. You don't want to do it because you're vehemently opposed, great. It doesn't matter, but if you want to be healthier, if you want to lose weight, if you want to build lean muscle tissue, you want to live a long, healthy, quality, strong, confident life, like, you're going to have to do all the shit that we're doing anyways.
It's the same, right? And that shit definitely needs to be done on a GLP-1. Right, like, and that's like even more so needs to be done, or you are going to see muscle loss. Some, again, they're just introductory. You even see some studies showing bone mineral composition loss. Yeah. I mean, it's again, more and more will come out, but we don't really know yet. But you need to, at the bare minimum, be doing your resistance training, be taking in your protein. It's like, if you're not even taking care of those yet, don't consider a GLP-1 until you've been doing those for a consistent period of time, because in order to see results you're going to be happy with, even on the GLP, you're going to need to be doing those things.
Yeah, I think I'll actually push back just in that. Ahead. I think that, you can kind of play the chicken egg game in terms of like, for some people, the going on the GLP could be the impetus and the momentum, right, to get them to want to do all of the other things. Right. And we see this sometimes with, like, hormone therapy for men or women, depending. And so I always look at it as, like, case dependent, but it's like, right, like, we're speaking the same language. I just, have to be adamant around, it's like, yeah, the strength training is super important regardless. And I work with a lot of men and women that are kind of in midlife, right? And you probably do too, but it's like, well, what do we know happens, through midlife, especially for women? We have perimenopause and menopause. And in menopause, they lose their estrogen production, and they lose the ability to support lean muscle tissue that they had, earlier on in life. And so I think, for women, it's extremely important for them to be strength training as early as possible, particularly with a focus on premenopausal muscle gain. Right,
to set you up for a position for the perimenopause.
That's right, because it just gets harder.
It does.
And my observation is that we have a lot of women, especially with the GLP-1s, who they want the quick fix, they want the kind of magic bullet, if you will, and they feel guilty over. Like, it's hard, right? Yeah. Any way you slice it, whether you're on the GLP-1s or not, you still have to do the work. Yeah. You still have to be cognizant of your nutrition. And so it's kind of this double-edged sword of, like, I want to be using this, but I feel guilty because I'm using it because I'm not doing all of the things that I know I should be doing.
Okay, gotcha.
You know what I mean? And so there's this sort of inherent guilt.
How do you handle that from a coaching perspective?
Well, I know that there's a lot of women whom I'm associated with that use, or perhaps in our community that use the GLP-1s but aren't open
about it. I run into the same thing. It's a taboo. It's almost a taboo topic.
And that's my point. And I don't think it should be.
No,
like I don't think
it's a diet. I mean, it's a medication that treats not only diabetes, but obviously one of the biggest problems in America right now, obesity. And I don't know why there is such the negative connotation associated with it.
Right. And so I think it just needs to be okay to be an open topic of conversation. Listen, even if it's someone who's, using the forms that are just for weight loss and not necessarily for diabetes, right? They're just getting semaglutide, or they're getting the tirzepatide, and maybe they have 10 pounds to lose or 20 pounds to lose. They're not necessarily diabetic or what have you. I think that's fine. And then same deal from a guy's standpoint is like, we know that guys are losing lean muscle tissue every single year after the age of 30, right? And especially now, like most guys aren't as physically active as they were, and this is the same for women too, as physically active as they were in young adulthood.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
And building that foundation, right? So it's even worse to the degree that it's like, people need to strength train. They need to be doing things to build lean muscle tissue consistently, and the GLP-1s are potentially going to push back against their ability to do that, especially if it significantly reduces their food intake.
Absolutely. It becomes one challenge with the GLP-1s that I've run into is getting enough of each nutrient in. Getting these people enough fats, enough proteins, and enough carbohydrates to satisfy all their needs, to satisfy enough protein to build muscle, enough carbohydrates so they don't go hypoglycemic during their lift. I mean, I've still got Transform. When they first came out, we had people going hypoglycemic left and right. We wouldn't believe how many people we had to sit down in a chair and literally like force feed saltines or some sort of carb to get them, because they just they were full from the, yesterday afternoon. So they weren't eating. So there have been a lot more considerations. Have you run into any clients who are having a hard time just straight up getting in enough nutrients, period?
Oh yeah, of course.
How do you deal with prioritizing, we need to get you enough protein, but we also need to make sure you get enough fat, enough carbohydrate?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of like this kind of spectrum approach. It's like there's so many things that we can tackle.
It is very nuanced,
right? But I think that's one of the benefits of the calorie tracking, because we can look at nutrient intake.
What's working.
And I think there becomes a point where it's like, listen, we've learned how to manage calorie intake. We've learned how to get enough protein. We've learned the value of eating nutrient-dense foods. And I think that's one of the hardest ones for most people, is like, because of the idea of flexible dieting and that, what I observe, and I'd love to hear from you, but it's like in the initial stages, people are so much more reliant on shakes, on bars, on processed foods to kind of hit their numbers.
The initial stages of like macro counting.
Of macro counting, of dieting, of kind of going down this journey. And so you need to kind of progressively get them into like, but whole real food. You need to learn how to prepare foods, cook for yourself. You nailed it. I think the macro movement glamorizes a lot of those things and encourages a lot of ultra processed food. Look, it's easy to barcode scan. It's easy to write. That in itself makes it easy. People, even though you're not 100% accurate just because you scan a barcode, but people feel better about it. There's a lot of the foods associated with flexible dieting that are popular brands already. And then, like you said, I mean, depending on the research study you read, over 70% of just what we eat is considered ultra processed. So less than 30% just of a normal diet is whole foods. So I think because of that, people go to what they know. If they're going to count things, it's easier to flip around a package and count numbers. They feel like, I'm going to start macro counting. You look at a potato, I don't know I don't want to pull a scale out and put on and have to learn how many. You know what I mean? It's more work, right? It comes down to being willing to do that work initially to set you up for the rest of your life. In my opinion, at least, it's kind of work that I do in the educational phase of my coaching. I have kind of like what it sounds like you do in the first month is largely education and learning your body, learning what works for you, and learning where things, I don't want to say are going wrong, but might be hindering you right now. And then identifying them and attacking them in degrees of importance.
right? Like what's going to have the most bang for your buck, the most value, and then teaching them to implement those. But unless you go about it that way, and that way starts with education, unless you go about it with that way of laying down that foundational education, you're never gonna, you're just gonna be on the same yo-yo the rest of your life, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it is identifying the low-hanging fruit, and at some point, we have to take the responsibility of making sure we're getting actually enough nutrition in, which is surprisingly hard to do because of food quality. And we see it consistently. It's like we know the soil quality sucks, therefore, the plants that are grown from the soil are going to be lacking in nutrition. And so we actually need a significantly higher volume of those foods to be getting enough of the minerals, as an example, the magnesium, the potassium.
Right. And most people just aren't hitting them. I'll be honest with you, this is me personally. For a lot of those things, I do take a supplemental approach with people because it's not realistic to get them to eat. I don't know how many people know this. A banana has 9% of your daily potassium. And that's thought of this potassium rich food, right? You start looking at how much, magnesium is in walnuts and start going, wait a minute, I have to eat 700 calories of nuts to get my daily, these foods are so devoid of nutrients now that the amounts we'd have to consume that, people are told to focus. Make sure you get enough magnesium. All right, I'm gonna get my magnesium today. Well, you just blew your calories out of the water doing so. People are in such a hard position of, they don't know what, like you said, what to focus on. What's the important stuff anymore?
Well, what are kind of the supplements that you focus on for the vast majority of people? I think that's probably
that's a great question. So talking a little bit about supplements, obviously it's very personalized to the individual, right? If there's medications that they're taking, so these are by no means across the board, but I will usually encourage people to be taking some sort of fish oil because I have found that 90% of people, their omega-3 to omega-6 balance is out of whack. And that's a great way to bring down inflammation. There's a lot of research studies linking fish oil to decreases not only in cardiovascular disease, but also brain degradation, Alzheimer's, other forms of dementia. So I'm big on fish oil because that way you're not I'm gonna have salmon. Now, if you love salmon, take your salmon, don't take fish oil. But I have found that the vast majority of people simply don't consume enough omega-3s. Yeah. It's an easy way to take care of. The next thing I would do would be a highly bioavailable multivitamin if somebody's in a deficit. And the reason is I don't think multivitamins are cure-alls, but I do think that we tend to rely on repetitive foods in deficits. We don't, whether it's time or convenience, we find a breakfast that's 450 calories and we make it 5 days a week because it's great for us cutting or doing whatever, right? Yeah. So I encourage people, whether it's something like one encapsulations or Thorne or somebody, to find a good high quality bioavailable multivitamin. After that, I usually will look at things like zinc, magnesium, vitamin D3. Those would probably be up there on my list. Those would probably be around my 5. Now there are other ones that would get switched out there. Creatine, it depends 100%. On, but those are kind of my basics. What is your?
I would say all of the same. In fact, those probably would be in order the exact same. The one that I've personally had a lot of benefit from is a good digestive enzyme.
So if you open the one I didn't mention was digestive enzyme because the gut microbiome and our digestion is one of still the more misunderstood things, and it is one of the very individualized things that I hate making blanket recommendations. Yeah. If someone's in a good spot and they go, oh, I heard take a digestive enzyme, and it messes with them. But if you're having issues, I have found a lot of people adding in a good digestive enzyme, it's all of a sudden it opens up the amount of foods they can have again.
Yeah, so early on in my life, I had a lot of gastrointestinal disorders. And
I did too.
Yeah, and so that's part of why I got into studying nutrition and exercise and everything and started working with people. Okay. And so I did a lot of studying around gastrointestinal health and digestion and supplementation around that stuff, and came to the realization that, for a vast majority of people, we have kind of this reduction, this hypochlorhydria, right? This reduction in stomach acid. Okay. And so especially in the early stages of a coaching program, when for a lot of people, digestion is impaired, we're not getting enough nutrition, a lot of people aren't drinking enough water, so we're not producing enough of the just literally the hydration.
The hydration needed,
and the enzymes, right? And so, and then we start getting them to eat more protein, right? And protein requires a significant amount of hydrochloric acid for digestion, And so what I observed early on is that by just simply aiding that process, you get a lot less pushback.
Right off the bat, and then having digestive issues. Do you have a digestive enzyme, like a favorite? Not to plug, so you know.
No, I really like, Thorne has a great one.
Thorne has great.
Biogest. At least it used to be called Biogest. Designs for Health. Biogest.
Okay.
That one has, well, both of these products are very similar. Designs for Health has one called Digestzymes.
Okay.
And it's HCl and ox bile. And
is that what you take personally?
Yeah, that's what I took it for years.
What was the name of the brand again?
Designs for Health.
Designs for Health.
Yeah, it's a very similar like practitioner type brand, like Thorne. Like a kind of a pharmaceutical brand of high quality products. And it has hydrochloric acid, but it also has ox bile, which is pancreatic, enzyme helping emulsify fats. Right?
Yeah. Wow. So,
and so
that's a good one.
You probably have a lot of clients with like gallbladder removed
who have trouble. You cannot process heavy amounts of fat, especially the direction food companies are going in manufacturing their foods being higher fat now. People are running into more digestive issues and they wonder why, and it's because their body is not breaking down.
Well, it's like the number one over-the-counter drug purchases are all coming from products that are either going to make you start going poop or stop going poop.
Well, here's one of the funniest, this is kind of just really quick, jumping back to GLP-1. I found it so funny that everyone was so eager to get on this. I remember being fat and watching the commercials about all this waste that was stuck in me and how it was so bad for the body to keep this stuff in the most permeable part of your body. But then it was like, hey, but if it's going to make you lose weight, you'll do any. I'm like, isn't this the thing that we all said we didn't want? We didn't want stuff trapped inside of us, and now because it leads to a smaller waistline, we're okay with it. It was so funny to me when they first came out. I was like, wait a minute, what? How do they work?
I mean, it's just it kind of is mind-boggling. I'm very, very curious and hopeful, that there's not going to be long-term complications
as well. Yeah,
it's just listen. I mean, anything that disrupts our natural physiology.
Put a guy on TRT for too long. What's going to happen?
Right.
Even if while he's on TRT, you have him at a healthy level. Now take him off TRT.
Well, right.
But, I mean,
exactly.
Who knows? I'm not saying that's but we just don't know yet. And that will be interesting to see the people who are on it for long extended periods trying to come off it and seeing what kind of pancreatic function they have, if there are any other, or if down the road people who are on it for 2 decades do start running into issues with digestion. I mean, we know that a small percentage end up with gastroparesis that does not get reversed. Who knows if the longer you're on it starts increasing your risk of that becoming a permanent. There's all sorts of question marks, right? And that's the thing for me is like, unless it's in my opinion, this is just me, unless it's a necessity and everything else is like we said, is kind of checked off, I would rather hold off on going straight. Because a lot of people are like, well, do you think I'm a good candidate? I'm like, let's get X, Y, and Z in place first. Then we can decide if you're a good candidate or not. And usually I need to at least have worked with somebody for a short time to know if X, Y, and Z are truly in place, or if they think they're in place. Yeah, I'm tracking my food. Yeah, I'm doing this, it's not working. Yeah, I'm doing this, it's not working. Well, you might think you're doing those in a really effective way, but it is entirely possible. We could go in and look and find out that you're taking in much more than you think, and you actually are not having a hard time losing weight on the right composition. We just need to find that for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some people it's just, it can absolutely be life-changing. We just have to ask more questions and not necessarily treat it as this panacea.
Exactly.
And again, like we've been just reiterating, is it can't go without the fundamentals regardless. And so I just think that's the most important component.
100%, yeah. And just to kind of reiterate, the fundamentals being obviously taking in and making sure you have enough protein, making sure you're resistance training. Please, if you're doing a GLP-1, doing resistance training with someone who knows what they're doing, because to be honest with you, I've seen people on GLP-1s exercising, and if that trainer, I mean, they need to know how hard to push that person because they're not well fueled. So working with a good trainer to ensure you maintain, bone density, ensure you maintain muscle mass, take in enough protein, which can become hard because protein fills you up, and you
that's invariably across the board. It's an issue with clients who are using at least a moderate to higher dose. Like I'm seeing more and more that clinicians are playing around with kind of microdosing.
They are with microdosing.
And I think it's cool that they're like compounded and they're below sort of the standardized dosing, which I think is a good idea and is helping people respond better, and they're getting just enough of kind of the satiety
of the effect, to see results.
Right, but nonetheless, is like you said, like protein, resistance training. I'd also say just like generally, and this goes across the board, this is not just GLP-1 related, but it's like movement and cardio.
Yeah.
It's like we forgot about cardio a while back.
Yeah, we did. Cardio started getting demonized.
I don't know if you know,
and about a decade
come
ago.
back in a big way, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important component of like, listen, the objective isn't just to, and I'd love kind of your experience working with clients, but the objective isn't just to take down someone's calorie intake as low as they possibly can.
Of course, yeah.
But it's obviously to build the biggest, most robust kind of metabolic machinery to get them to be able to eat as much as they possibly can, right, for their
that's always my goal. Now sometimes that comes in two different. There's a pathway there. It's people would love to do those things simultaneously, and I think a lot of people want to. Sometimes they have to go through a phase of losing before we go through rebuilding them or whatever it may be. But yeah, absolutely, the goal is always to send the person on their way, not simply at their smallest, but send them on their way at their ideal physique, whatever that is, at their ideal health, in a way that they know how to sustain that thing, and then they actually have the knowledge to sustain that thing. A lot of times that goes through, and I know this is more of a new term. I don't know if you saw Bill Campbell. They're doing the first. Do you follow Dr. Bill Campbell?
Yeah,
do you follow?
sure.
So they're doing the first study on reverse dieting.
Yeah,
Did you see that?
Yep.
So I'll be curious to see what comes out of that.
Cool.
I've done reverse dieting with a lot of clients. I know a lot of people don't believe in it at all. They don't think it's a thing. I know other people who are all for it. The way I look at it, regardless, you have to admit when people diet, there's some sort of decrease in hormones.
Yep.
And if you don't take the time to bring those back up the right way, you're probably going to see some excess fat gain, or you might not get them back up the right way. So that I know that kind of played into. I know that was kind of.
I'm not sure if
that's what you were asking, but
I think it's super relevant, and I think it's a different topic, but I want to dive into that. What I'm curious, because you've helped a lot of people lose a lot of weight, and I think that it's important for people to understand like what the process should look like, should feel like, what are the roadblocks that they're going to hit along the way.
And what does that pathway look like? Exactly.
100%.
And how do you handle the roadblocks? How do you set it up in a way? So I am a proponent of reverse dieting, and I will get to that. For the average person, I start them off, regardless of the position they're in, asking if they're comfortable with the body fat they're at. Because if they're not comfortable, because I do get people coming to me just for reverse dieting. And I'm like, unless you're happy with your body fat, you're not going to lose body fat during this process. We're improving hormones, which means you're not going to be in a deficit. If you're in a deficit, your hormones are not very happy when you're usually in a deficit, right? So you're not going to lose any more fat. A lot of people have been told reverse dieting is losing fat while you build your metabolism. I go, that'd be great if you could do that. If there's some way, I'm like, that is counterintuitive. So if anyone's been told so the way I usually start is, are you happy with where you're at in terms of your external physique? Because that's going to determine energy balance. And if they're not, 9 times out of 10 will encourage them to get down to the body fat that they're going to be comfortable at. Because
isn't the reason, sorry to interrupt, but I imagine the vast majority of people that come in and see you are seeing you because they're not happy with their current body composition.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. While I do, obviously I highlight the larger people. About 80% of my clients are people who need to lose, or even gain in the 10-ish to 20 pound range. That's the bread and butter. That's going to be what most of your people are. There's only so many 600 pound people.
Yeah.
I think me having worked with a lot of those, I now have 33 people who have lost over 100 pounds.
That's incredible.
6 of those lost over 300, 12 of those lost over 200. So I have a good amount of experience in long-term dieting. And there's no denying that certain hormones take a hit when you're dieting. Yeah. Your testosterone takes a hit when you're dieting. Anyone who's dieted long term, your libido is shot by the time, which means you're burning less calories. Your thyroid is going to take a hit. You're going to see, you measure your T3, T4 at the beginning, measure them 12 months down the road from underfeeding yourself. Your TSH will start to go up because it's trying, these things are happening. And I think very few people, so what I do is I bring somebody down in body fat, and then my initial reverse dieting phase, what it looks like, I've changed this, but the way that I start a reverse dieting phase for people.
Before you get there, how long will you take someone through a dieting phase?
So I like to move at a rate, it depends on how much the person needs to lose, obviously, right? A lot of it depends on how they need to lose, but I will usually look to lose at around 1% of total body weight weekly. That's kind of my general goal because that can apply to a lot of populations. I look for generally 1% of total body weight weekly. Now, you and I both know some people will see more when they're very large at the beginning. Some people might see less if they're picking up resistance training at the same time. But that's kind of what I start with is we're going to be looking to reduce 1% of total body weight weekly if that is your goal. If your goal is to lose weight. Yeah. What was that?
And so they have 50 pounds to lose as an example. Are you looking to, like, we're going to shed as much of that extra
before the body starts to push back and we start but I will, if I do start to push back, I say, you know what guys, we need to reorganize.
Things are stagnating. Timeline. What are you looking at in terms of pushback? Lethargy, fatigue.
So I'm tracking their weight week over week. I'm obviously tracking things like stress levels, things like you said, lethargy, fatigue. And when those are starting to impact their life on a daily basis in a negative way, then I say,
or like you find that they're cheating more,
exactly.
Like they're falling off. They have a hard time with compliance. They're miserable.
I do one of two things, and it kind of depends on the client, where they're at mentally, how far they are. I either do what's called an audit week, which is like, guys, we're going to audit everything. You're going to pull the food scale back out. You're going to make sure that you really are doing what you think you're doing to make sure that it's not a false stall.
Assuming you're seeing stagnancy on the scale for a few weeks.
Right. So I call that an audit week. But if somebody mentally, you know as well as I do, they're just not in the place for that. They're like, that will push them over the edge. In that case, I go, look, there's nothing wrong with reorganizing the timeline. We might need to bring your metabolism up a little bit right now. We might need to feed you more. We might need to focus on building a little bit more muscle. And then come back and finish off the fat. I go, in reality, you're not adding any time. You're just reorganizing when you were going to do what. And I convinced them that they have to be okay with that in that situation. And I think that's where a lot of people have a hard time.
I think life tends to factor in a way where it naturally
does that.
It's sort of just, it's spring break, or it's like we're going on summer, we're going to be traveling all summer. I've been dieting hard since the new year.
Exactly.
And it's like, you know what, now probably would be a logical time.
Now would be a logical time
for us.
And that's exactly, you and I both do it the same way. I mean, there's a and that's exactly what I do. I go, you know what, let's lean into what we're leaning into. For instance, I had a client who just recently, she's incredibly busy. Her business is doing great. Kudos to her. But she was previously having a hard time losing and had kind of like given up on losing. She's like, I'm not budging, I'm not going anywhere. But she has gotten so busy. She is like, food is a second thought. So I went to her and I said, you know what? Let's not look at, she's like, I'm so sorry I'm not hitting my numbers. I'm like, you still did have some fat to lose. Let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. Yeah. You're not hungry right now. You're not finishing your calories. Let's go ahead and lean into it and finish the deficit. That wasn't our plan. We pivoted literally 1 week from what we were doing. And I said, you know what? You're so damn busy that your hunger is so low that you're eating at this. Let's just get the fat done with and finish it off. But that was completely life driven.
Sure.
That was her life circumstance. So now she's lean enough. Now we're able to build her back up where, you know what I mean? So like, I think you said it perfectly. I'm not sure what your phrasing was, but you nailed it. Life will do it on its own. The trip to Italy or
we call it like our nutrition seasons. And it's basically seasons, like we just all go through these undulations and it's like shit happens or God forbid, family member passes away.
Or a major health crisis or something like that.
Health crisis and stressful situations or put out fires at work or big project that we like need to be all in on. And just the priorities shift to the degree that oftentimes we can justify pivoting appropriately based on where someone is. Right. And that sounds like kind of that's when you would go, okay, let's go reverse diet. What does that look like for you guys?
Exactly. So me jumping into reverse diet, I will break it down and feel free to interrupt me here. But if someone is done dieting and they go, Matt, I'm happy with my body fat. I don't want to lose any more body fat. I want to get my metabolism cranking. I do it in a 2-week approach at the beginning. And the reason I take 2 weeks is my goal in the first 2 weeks is to get them up to what I believe is their maintenance. So I want them to get up to maintenance over a 2-week period. So I take the last 4 weeks of their weight loss and I estimate what they were losing. So let's say they lost 1.2, 1.4, 1.2, 1.4. So they're losing 1.3 pounds a week at the end, right? So I assume their calorie deficit is around 650 per day, right? So the reason I'd break it into 2 weeks is 2 reasons. I used to do 1 week. I would just, boom, you're up 650 calories. The problem was people's digestive systems did not like having a whole extra meal, and people didn't like how fast their weight went up. They panicked very quickly, right? And because what I had to convince them, at the end of a dieting phase, not only are you eating less calories, which means you have less food in your stomach, but you're more glycogen depleted than ever before. And we know, you and I both know, each gram of glycogen stores 2.8 fluid grams of water. So as that glycogen comes back, plus you're eating an extra 650 calories, that's like a whole meal.
Carbohydrate.
Carbohydrate. Yes,
Carbs
exactly.
pull in water.
Good hydration though.
That's right.
Yeah, so I do it in a 2-phase approach. Basically, I take whatever the increase in calories is going to be and I break it over 2 weeks. And I tell the person, depending on their size, how much muscle mass, to expect roughly 2 to 3 pounds of gain. And I say, they go, okay, as long as they don't gain fat. And I go, you're not going to gain fat, but your stomach's going to feel bigger. And they go, why is my stomach? I'm like, you have 650 calories of more food. You know, at the end of a cut, you just feel like empty. You feel like just diced in the morning. You're just like, you're not going to feel that way anymore. And I go, the other thing is that glycogen filling out, your trunk has a lot of muscle mass. You're going to get a little bit more full. So you're going to look more toned, but you will be slightly larger. So understand that. So we spend 2 weeks doing that our goal is an increase of no more than, depending on the size of the person, 2 to 3 pounds. Then after that, we run 1 full week at those numbers and see what the response is now. And the idea is now we've been, for at least 1 full week, adequately feeding you. The other week was a much smaller deficit than what you were used to. Now let's see what your body does to this. If the body goes up by more than 0.5, then I will not make an increase. I will give them more time to ride at those numbers and let some of those hormones come back.
Yeah.
If we get a good response, which you'd be shocked how often people's bodies are just like, thank you. And
we get like, I'm leaner.
Yeah. And we get a good response. Then we ratchet those calories up. But it's really funny how it works. It's like, I might have 2 weeks in a row where I make 120, 180 calorie increase, and then the person's weight shoots through the roof and they don't want to make an increase that week. And we don't, it's so nuanced as you're going through it. People always ask me, once they're done cutting, can you give me a blueprint for my reverse diet? And I go, I always explain to them, I go, you know, the cut we just finished, you know how weird that was going up and down? Imagine if I had tried to give you that blueprint it looked nothing like what we thought. Very rarely does a weight loss phase look like that, right? So that's kind of how I approach it. The first 2 weeks are reintroducing. Then after that, the majority of the calories, we obviously don't need more protein. It's not going to benefit you, so there's no increases in protein. The increases then come from mostly carbohydrates and some fats, because again, like you said, very few people are under eating fats for hormonal needs. That one is way overblown because of that one study a long time ago on saturated fats. It is a very small percentage of the population. So the majority of the calories that come back are carbohydrates. And the reason I do that is I have found that that keeps people more full. You look at satiety studies, carbohydrates absolutely kill it in satiety studies. They help to stimulate leptin. They do a good job at suppressing ghrelin because they're high volume. So for all those reasons, I little by little increase the carbohydrates that people, which then allows them not only that, but carbohydrates stimulate insulin. Insulin is responsible for the uptake of glucose, but also amino acids, right? So it's like we're building more muscle too because we're giving you more. So for all those reasons, and the reason that they just wouldn't benefit you in fats or protein, like they wouldn't be doing any good. For that reason, they continue to come in carbohydrates until I hit what I call their ceiling, which is like getting them back up to where they should have been if they had never yo-yo dieted. Because I think what a lot of people do is they diet for a wedding for 12 weeks, and then in 2 weeks they blow it. And they don't realize that you did hormonal damage for 12 weeks, you only did yourself a service for 2 weeks. If you do that repeatedly, -10, -10, -15.
So what are you looking for
to stop the diet?
Scale weight standpoint? When you see the ceiling?
When I see a back-to-back weekly increase of 0.5, that's like, all right, with no reason, with no bowel movement irregularity, nothing like that, then I say, all right, we've hit your ceiling. And I'll show you some of my spreadsheets. You'd be shocked. I have people who finish their dieting phase losing 1.2 a week at 1,800 to 1,900, who then get up to 3,200, 3,400 on the calories. But they're my really disciplined clients who are willing to take it slow and low. You know as well as I do, it's the people who want a lot of people see them, then they go, I want to reverse diet with you. And they come to me and they go, so when do I get to eat? And I'm like, no, that's not, no, Matt you don't understand. He put in 6 months. Do you want me to show you his sheet? Look, here's a 20 calorie increase. Here's a 40. And then we didn't increase for 3 weeks because we weren't liking what we were seeing. And then we did this again. So it is a challenging, that's why I'm really interested to see Bill Campbell's study and see what comes out of it. Because to my knowledge, it's the first actual study being done on reverse dieting. Yeah. So what's his name? If you've ever looked at it, Andrew Pardue, who's a natural bodybuilder, is Andrew Pardue, Pardue, did like an N1 study. So it's completely anecdotal, but he basically did a reverse dieting study on himself. And he's a natural bodybuilder for OCB. And he was also a clinical research student at the time. So he did a study and it actually got published and picked up. I can't remember what journal picked it up, but it was a singular person. You would not, I couldn't even believe how tanked his hormones were. And this is someone who knows how to diet. This is not someone who did it the wrong way. Yeah. I could not believe his T3, his T4, his testosterone just tanked by the end of his deficit. And this is somebody doing it the right way.
Right.
Imagine somebody doing it. Then I looked at his numbers 6 months down the road. He was still just barely getting back to where he was at the beginning of his diet. And again, we're talking about somebody who knows how to do it the right way. Yeah. So that was enough for me to be like, all right, we need a better, and the other thing I kept running into, sorry to go on for so long, the other thing I kept running into was people kept coming back to me who would get fat again after they left me.
Correct.
And I was like, what am I doing wrong here?
That's right.
That Joe has come back to me twice. He's gotten fat again. Why am I not fixing Joe? And I was helping Joe lose the weight, but I wasn't teaching him enough. And I wasn't getting his metabolism back. I wasn't getting him back to a healthy position. I was just getting him smaller and then sending him on his way.
We talked earlier in our conversation around setting client expectations and the importance of really laying the groundwork.
Right.
And I would say if there's probably one takeaway over my last close to 20 years of coaching, it is just that is helping the client acknowledge that this is a significant process.
It is.
And you're not just going to work with us for 6 months or a year and get to your ideal body composition or necessarily health. And it's really sort of investing in this long-term, cyclical, undulating process that has lots of trials and tribulations along the way.
That is very well said. And I wish that more people would say that to their client up front, because social media, what you just said, I love that clip so much. People say the opposite. People talk about how easy it's going to be and how, and it's all to sell. It's all to sell people. And then they wonder why they're not seeing results. But if more coaches were honest and upfront, I think they're afraid they're not going to sign anybody up if they do that. But guess what, dude? You're not going to help anybody if you lie to them.
You're not helping them. And it's like you're going to take them through a 3-month or 6-month shred.
Yeah.
And then they're going to be screwed on the back end.
They're going to be screwed on the back end.
And by the way, you're never going to get that client back again.
No. And they're going to talk shit about you.
And how many clients have you had who you've worked with and have ended up being in a good position?
Yeah.
And then you know what? Life happens.
Yeah.
And they come back to you.
They do.
And they come back. And I think that's the most important thing that we can think about as coaches is like, hey, what if as a coach, and if there's any coaches listening to this, what if you never lost a client?
Yeah.
Again, how good would your business be?
Exactly.
Imagine what would you need to do with your clients? What would you need to do with your business to set it up in such a way that you could potentially keep a client for the rest of their life?
Yeah, I like that. That's actually good. I like
you know
that.
What
That's
I mean?
A good question. Yeah.
And so it's just helping them understand that okay, this is the big picture here. And so we're always talking with clients around, okay, here's our kind of short-term goal, right? Here's logistically, objectively, here's what we're focused on, calories, macros, here's what we should see on the scale and from a body composition, right? And here's how we're weaving this into your lifestyle and what's coming up in the calendar and responsibilities and everything. But over the long term here's the things that we're going to need to be cognizant of.
Right.
Like we know that there's going to be roadblocks, and detours and shit like that. And so it's always...
And that's what people need help with too. Like I tell people all the time, it's like, fair weather weeks are not what you need to learn about. You don't need to learn the first 3 weeks of January when everyone is dry. You need to learn the last 3 weeks of December. You need to learn how to just simply navigate that, enjoy it, and not then have to use the first 2 months of the new year to undo it.
Right.
If you learn that skill set, you are set for life instead of just learning how to lose it again every January. Because guess what? Based on the research, we don't quite lose it all each year. And little by little, you know as well as I do, that it adds up. And that's really where it comes from, is like you said, this cycle that people just don't want to get off of. They'll do the work to get it down, but they won't do the work to break the cycle. Right? And it just becomes temporary and repetitive for them because of that.
Yeah. Well, I think everything that we're touching on, that we preach, that we constantly talk about, and the perspective that we take around this stuff is exactly what people need to take into consideration when they kind of look at the long term.
Right.
And that they have the opportunity, like that they should be looking at the long term. Like, find a good coach who's going to support you through the long term, who's going to speak honestly about, and is kind of committed and convicted about their process, because we all have our own process, which you should. But they actually have a process and a system for how they do things.
And they really believe in it.
Right? They believe in it, and they can kind of walk you through, honestly, like, it's going to take a year. It's going to take, here's what we can accomplish over the first year. I don't want to talk about 3 months. Don't even bring up 3 months to me. Let's talk about what we can do in the first year. And then here's the things that you're going to encounter year 2, year 3. And by the way, you're probably not going to look your absolute best until year 4.
Year 4, year 5. Yeah. Right? And I think a lot of people underestimate what the timeline needs to look like to really get to their best.
Without question.
I think you nailed it. And I think social media, again, has made that worse. Gear use, steroid use is promoted now. I don't know if you've been on Instagram lately, but it's like they encourage 17-year-olds to get on stuff.
It's like our conversation.
Everything is instant gratification.
I try not to pay attention, and I try and just speak to, our truth. Yeah. And not worry about that stuff.
Obviously doing a good job.
Well, listen, people are going to learn. They need to learn their own ways. Yeah. Right? And I don't think it's bad if someone does a diet or, tries carnivore or tries keto or experiments with intermittent fasting. I think it's almost, as long as we're framing it appropriately, and we're reflecting on, what are the lessons that you learned? Right. Well, we know what doesn't work for you. Right. But maybe there were elements that did work well for you. And how can we take pieces of that? Because that's when, you have a client who gets great long-term results. They've developed their own
structure and their own approach. And I think that people, instead of looking for that out of diet, they look for a number of pounds they lost out of a diet, and they miss out on a lot of information. Even if the diet wasn't what they deemed successful, they miss out on so many things that they could have taken from that approach to use the next time they try to lose that will be invaluable in them seeing success, because maybe 1 or 2 things did work, but the rest of it was too unsustainable. But now hey, I really like doing these 1 or 2 things. Might not have been a long-term successful diet, but take what you've learned from it. I think that's the biggest thing, is this whole thing is an education. It's not just a short-term, let me change my body. It's let me learn how and why my body responds to what it does. And I think if you can teach somebody that, the rest falls in place. If their goal is to build muscle, if their goal is to lose fat, whether they want to know about a GLP-1 or not, all of those things, if you've answered those questions at the beginning, it makes all of that so much easier. And I think that coaches like you and I take that approach, and we take care of those things at the beginning. And I think if you don't, it becomes very, very difficult to set up a long-term success plan. And then you're basically just hanging on to the person as long as you can in that case.
Yeah, amen.
That's what I've seen, at least.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you found this content valuable, here are 4 ways I can help you in your nutrition journey for free. 1. Grab a free copy of my Fat Loss Fix Guide at fatlossfixguide.com. 2. Join my free group at smartnutritionmadesimple.com. 3. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at smartnutritionmadesimple.tv.com. 4. Leave a 5-star rating and positive review so that we can gain access to more nutrition experts ready to share their knowledge with you and ultimately help more people make smart nutrition simple.